To the moms worshiping at Fulton Heights or Kentwood, watching online, to the mother-like figures in our lives, you are loved and you are appreciated. And today we hope that you know that you're celebrated. Church, we are in part 2 of a series together called Darkroom, the hidden places that God develops you. And we kicked it off last week with the metaphor, with this image of this old-timey camera, right, that uses a medium we don't really know much about anymore. It's called film, right? And the idea, in case you missed it or you have no idea how cameras used to work, when you open up the back of the canister of the camera, the worst thing that could ever happen to a roll of film is that it would be exposed to light before it was ready. You see, what the developer would have to do with that film after it was all rolled up is to take it and expose it in a completely dark room and work on this with different chemicals and treatments, and over time, an image would develop. If light hit the film before it was ready, it would kind of burn through the film and really wreck whatever image that you're trying to develop. And we're kind of using that throughout this series and taking a look at the life of David and said, man, in between the time that he was anointed as the next king of Israel and by the time he actually became the king of Israel, it was 15 years. He was anointed when he was probably around 15 years old. He became king when he was somewhere around 30 years old. And in just this time of waiting, this time of development, that God was doing something in his heart. And we're just kind of like applying that one on our lives, and we're going, man, God has a vision for you. God has a purpose for you, and God has a plan for you. And there's so many of us that are going, I haven't seen it yet. I have no idea what that is yet. And we just want to look at the life of David and say, even someone with a huge calling and a huge vision, and David knew exactly what it was, it still took a decade and a half. You are in, we said last week, day 1 of the dark room. He's developing something inside of you. And we say around here a lot that waiting time isn't wasted time. But I want to caveat that for the purpose of this series, because we do this exercise with couples when they're about to get married to kind of burst some myths, that they might be expecting. So it's kind of a myth-busting activity. Remember that TV show? And we're going hey, these are some lies, these cultural lies that we're told. And one of them, time will resolve most of the issues that we have as a couple. And some of you who've been married for a little while, you're like, oh, no. Time just compounds whatever you have going for you or against you, right? It's not just that time will fix things. It's that hard work, it's that communication, it's that these disciplines over time, compounded over time, that's what makes the difference. That's what stretches us and that's what grows us. When we're taking a look at the life of David, we're saying that waiting time isn't wasted time. But sometimes for us, it's not just our task to kind of sit in our hands. It's that God is going to involve us as this junior partner in this process of development. So before he does something through you, he's definitely going to do something in you. And what we're doing throughout this series for the next 3 parts is saying, okay, now that we've established that we're in the dark room, what is he growing in us? What is he developing inside of us? In a couple of weeks, we're going to take a look at this doing life together, this community piece to it. Next week, we're going to talk about the servant heart that God is developing in us. But today, we're dropping in all this, the life of David. We're dropping in and seeing how David learned to cultivate this trust with God, this closeness with God, this intimacy with God. And we're going to do that by going to an unlikely place. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's the David and Goliath story. So Fulton Heights, Kentwood, watching online, how many of you have heard the David and Goliath story? Like everybody. Even if this is your first time in church, you're like, I got it, okay? Because I read the sports page, right? I get the whole David and Goliath thing, the little guy versus the big guy. I know how this story ends. You know how this story ends. Have a little empathy for me as a preacher trying to preach this thing. You have heard 20 sermons on this already. If you've been at a counter, you've probably heard 4 since we started this church. I'm trying to breathe a little something new into this, all right? And you already know how the story ends. And because of that, I think we're at a huge disadvantage. Because I think we've missed so much about what's actually going on in this story. So I know that you know how this story ends. We're going to put the ending on hold here for a little bit. Because I want us to see kind of what God is doing before David ever steps foot into that valley against Goliath. All right, because I want each of us, I want us to know that David did not defeat Goliath. David didn't defeat the giant in the valley. And when you have your giant, you won't defeat him in the valley either. So we're going to read the story, but I just want to invite you in to kind of like picture whatever your giant is, whatever that thing in your life that needs to be slayed. I'm talking maybe it's a hang-up, maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's something you've been trying to kick for a little while. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's this anxious presence that's just around you all of the time. Maybe it's the fact that the person that you married a long time ago is now having these hard conversations about whether or not she or he is still a Christian and a committed Jesus follower, and you thought, I love this thing most about you, and now you're asking these really remarkably difficult questions and talking about walking away. Right? Whatever the giant thing is in your life, the first thing that you think about in the morning, the last thing that you think about before you lay down your head at night. Maybe it's regret. Maybe it's a lifetime of regret. It's a missed opportunity sometime in your past, and you just can't get over it and move on. You've got this giant, and I want you to know that it is not going to get defeated in hand-to-hand combat down in that valley. What's infinitely more important is what comes a long time earlier. So we're going to go to there. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to pick it up in verse 20 here. Okay, here's how the story begins. Early in the morning, David, he left the flock. Remember, he was a little shepherd boy. He was the youngest. He was the runt of the litter. He was the smallest. He was no good on the battlefield. So when everybody goes off to war, David is the one left behind. He's going to run supplies back and forth. He's not going out to the front lines, the battle lines, to fight. Far from it. He's running out to the battle lines to bring bread and cheese out to them. So he leaves the sheep behind in care of a shepherd, not any particular one, just, okay, more important things. He loads up, set out, as Jesse had directed, that's his dad, and he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions. They weren't fighting, that's important, but they were gathering into their battle positions, and they were shouting the war cry. They were amping each other up. Israel and the Philistines, those are two sides that we have here. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. Their lines were facing each other. Now, I just think it would be super helpful for us if we just saw it on a map. So I've got you guys remember Bing Maps, right? They have the best map software, so it takes out the cities and all that. And anyway, I don't know why. A little plug for Bing. They need it. All right, so this is Bing Maps. This is my copyright infringement that I just wanted to get off my chest. Confession, okay? It's good for the soul. Okay, this is kind of modern-day Israel, all right? And a lot of the geography actually hasn't changed. So even though it's a modern map of an ancient time, you can kind of see where the dry, arid places are and where the nicer plains are. So you kind of see this mountainous area right in here. That's all dry. That's where Israel was at the time. And you can kind of see this big old green valley. We'll get to that just here in a minute. And then you can kind of see, if you're really paying attention, this mountainous area right here. They like to build their cities up on an elevated plane because it's just easier to defend, right? To fight somebody who's climbing up a hill towards you. It's a much easier place to defend your territory. And so let's put a few things on the map. We have the good guys over here. We have Israel. Bethlehem, we heard about that one last week, is right over here. We've got Jerusalem, maybe a little bit north of that. Hebron, a little bit south of that. And on the opposing side, on the other side, we have the Philistines. We've got a few cities like Gaza. We have Ashdod. We had Goth right over here. Kind of see what I'm doing. And what the plan is from the Philistines who want to attack the Israelites. So what they're going to do, they're going to get their huddle together, and what they're going to do is get a little tackle dive right up the middle here and attack Jerusalem from the west to the east. Some of you are like, I think I remember that from Madden 2006. It's pretty much exactly what we got going on here. I wanted to point this out. I want to point this out on the map because what you see is that mountainous area where Israel is, and this mountainous area on the coastal plain where the Philistines are, and this nice, lush, green valley below. That's called the Shephelah. It just means the valley or the foothills. And what you have in the Shephelah is these rivers running from the mountain to the seas, just kind of all back and forth, right? And the strategy of the Philistines is to get their army together and to sneak attack. They don't want Israel to know they're coming. Remember, Israel's got that elevated plain happening. And so what the Philistines are going to do is to kind of wind their way around one of these rivers in between the two mountains and sneak attack on the Israelites. Well, Saul gets word of this. King Saul gets word of it. He knows that the Philistines are attacking with a huge force. And he knows He knows that they're coming out. And so what he does, he gathers everybody together, and he's now going to ambush the ambushers, right? And so he gets his forces to come on out, and he comes up on top of one of these plains right here, and he just kind of hangs out in that area. And he watches the valley below. He knows that they don't know that he's up there, and he's going to ambush them when they come through the valley. Now the Philistines, whatever, they send a scout, they find out somehow the Israelites are waiting up on top of that ridge, and they're going to come through in this trap, this ambush, and walk right into it. Oh no, the Philistines, the scouts report back, hey, they're right up there. And so what the Philistines do is they get into position now on the south side of the hill, on the ridge, on the opposing side. So they scurry up the side, and there's this valley down below. You got Israel up here, and you've got the Philistines over here. And it's so important because nobody in that setting wants to make the first move, do they? Nobody wants to go down into the valley and to try to come up on the other side and attack the opposing force from a hugely disadvantaged position. And so that's when Samuel tells the story. And he goes, hey, we have these two sides up on top of the ridges, and they are deadlocked. And what I want us to know is 40 days. 40 days this is going on. That's why David, as a shepherd boy, needs to go bring bread and cheese to his brothers who are doing the fighting, because it's been over a month now of the Philistines just taunting the Israelites. What they did in the time is instead of everybody having to die, they were a civilized people, and they said, hey, we'll send our strongest, you send your strongest, we'll go down, have those two go down in the valley. Whoever wins, wins. Kind of a winner-take-all sort of deal. Oh, and by the way, our big guy is named Goliath. Our big guy is from a city named Gath, over on that coastal plain, one of those circles that I put on the map earlier. By the way, Gath has this reputation of growing giants. This dude, Goliath, like his family members, 9 feet tall. He's got arms the size of my waist, which as I age is getting more and more impressive over the years. He's got these tribal tattoos all over. He's got the barbed wire on his bicep thing going on. I don't know. That's outside of the Bible. That's just my guess. It's cultural equivalent of that. The dude is a mountain. He's huge, and he's imposing, and he's shouting these insults, not just against Israel and the Israelite army. He's shouting these insults against the God of the Israelites. Come on down into the Shephelah. Come on down into the valley of Elah. Come on down, over and over and over. I want to say a couple things about this that you might not read at a cursory kind of reading of the story. Those 3 cities, Gaza, Ashdod, and Gath, where Goliath was from, Gath. Those cities were named previously. Long before David came on the scene, long before Saul or Samuel or so many others. Way earlier in the biblical story, in the book of Joshua, when God is having his people come through and say, man, this was the land that I promised Abraham. And there were some things that were going on here that needed to be done away with. The people needed to exit the land. And I'm telling you, this is the land that I promised your forefathers. So what I need you to do is to start clean. These cities have practices that do not belong here. Rid the land of their presence. Get rid of Gath. And Joshua comes through, and he did so many. Jericho, Ai, so many others. But he never finished the job. And now the great-great-great-grandkids of Joshua are fighting the same battles and are fighting the same giants that their great-great-great-grandparents had to fight. I'm just going to step back right now and share my pastoral heart for you, because I've gotten to know so many and I've heard so many stories, and so many of them just repeat. Dirk, man, this is what terrifies me about marriage. I open up my family history, the genealogy, and I just think about my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, my parents, maybe on both sides, and I look up, and it's like divorce has swept through our family tree like oak wilt. It just infects everything. How do I not make it affect me? I'm in my 50s right now. My kids are older. They're getting out of the house. I have some time to look back and to reflect. And I realized in that reflection, I have become the same workaholic dad as my dad was. And the generation after generation, it just perpetuates itself. We never should have been fighting this battle. I wish one of the generations would have just put a stop to it. And man, I want to encourage you. Especially for those of you who did not come from a spiritually healthy family. Just because you did not come from a spiritually healthy family does not mean that one cannot come from you. But it is time to do things differently, remarkably different, in order to slay that giant. Maybe not for yourself, for your kids, for your grandkids, for everybody who comes next. What strikes me is that Israelite army was up on top of that ridge, listening to the taunts and listening to the insults of Goliath for 40 days, morning and evening. They heard the insult a total of 80 times before David shows up on scene to bring bread and cheese to his brother. They heard the taunts 80 times, and David shows up, hears it one time, and says, "That's enough. That's more than enough." Something ends today. Giants are going to get slayed today. And you know the story. The giant was slayed that day, but the giant was defeated a long time earlier. Not in that valley. All right, back to the story, verse 32. David, he's going to do something. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine." And just the way that he says it, I think, just makes it sound like an insult. "Your servant," he's talking about himself, "your servant will go and fight him." And I think everybody starts to laugh at that point because he's so little, remember. David replied, "You're not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man." And he has been, and it's a technical term actually, a warrior from youth. You see, there were 3 classes of military in those days. There was the cavalry, the guys with horses, maybe chariots. There was the infantry. That was the warrior term that was used here. That's like the Marines, the infantry, the hand-to-hand combat, the guys on feet, right? The bravest, the few, the proud that are going to fight them directly. And then behind them there was the artillery. That was the archers, and to a lesser extent the slingshots, which we'll get to in a moment. And Saul's going, "David, come on, man. Your archery at best. He is a warrior. He is infantry. He's the best kind of infantry. He's a 9-foot infantryman trained from birth for this one purpose." They're laughing at him. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep." Okay? "When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it." Against the lions and bears, "struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth, and when it turned on me," not if, but when it turned on me, "I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it." I think they stopped laughing there for a minute, right? Like, that's an intense thing to say coming out of this little kid's mouth. And everybody looks at him and is like, "You fought lions and bears?" And he's going, "Yeah. And Vikings and the Green Bay Packers too. Just buckle up. We're going somewhere with all this, right?" But as he says this, I think the tone in the room is like mellowing a little bit. And then he makes his point. This is huge. This is everything. Okay, if you're like the Bible highlighting kind of person, it's this verse. It's verse 36. Everything is captured right here. "Your servant," David's talking, "your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine," which I have to say, as far as insults go, dramatically underrated. If you told me that you called somebody an uncircumcised Philistine this week, I mean, as a pastor, I'm a little disappointed. As a person, it's hilarious. Okay. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because, okay, this is everything. Back to being serious mode. Okay, because he has defied, this phrase right here, "the armies of the living God." We're going to come back to that. The Lord, right, all caps here. All caps means that it's the proper noun. It's the divine name of the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion, and the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the bear. This Lord will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. I said this is everything, and I'm making this whole dramatic point about how David didn't slay Goliath, or didn't defeat Goliath in the valley, but long before. David shows up on scene, and what do you notice? He immediately goes and he's talking about the Lord. Nobody else in the chapter except Goliath hurling insults was talking about the Lord. David can't seem not to talk about the Lord. It's everything to him. That's like all he sees. He doesn't even see the giant down in the valley. He calls him an uncircumcised Philistine. He doesn't care who it is. He just sees the Lord, the presence of God all around him. And he really tips his hand in that phrase that I highlighted a little bit earlier, the armies, plural, of the living God, in Hebrew, Yahweh Sabaoth. It's a term, it's a title, actually. Sometimes the living God is translated as the Lord of hosts. Other times in the Bible, you might look up and see a different translation, the God of the angel armies. And you'll remember that song from way back, who is always on my side. David shows up on scene. He doesn't see an army either. He says in the story, armies, plural. He's the first one. He's the only one, again, besides the Philistine, he's the only one on the Israelite camp to refer to the armies, plural, of Israel. Everybody else calls it the army. The army of Saul, the army of Israel. But David looks out and he doesn't see one army, he sees a multitude. He's the first one that changes it to armies because he knows it's not just his brother and some friends up there on top of the ridge fighting. I think Max Lucado says it best. And he goes, David looks out over that valley and the opposing ridge, and he sees a platoon of angels. He sees a squadron of saints. Look at it right. David looks out over that valley and that ridge on the opposing side, and he sees all of the forces of the earth and the power of the wind at the Israelite disposal behind his back. And David might, in those moments, David might wonder, not if he's going to come out victorious. No, that's been decided a very long time ago. The trust and the confidence that David has in God. David just wonders, is he going to rain down hail like he did for Moses? He looks at the Philistine and he goes, is he going to collapse the walls in like he did for Joshua? He looks at the Philistines and he goes, I wonder if he's going to stir the thunder and the lightning like he did for Samuel. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know it's going to happen because David has this unshakable, committed, intimate, close relationship with God. This trust is phenomenal. And you guys know the rest of the story. He tries on the army. It's big. It's clunky. Saul, quit trying to dress me like infantry. I'm artillery, dude. And David goes, and he doesn't pick up a sword. He doesn't pick up a spear. He gets those 5 smooth stones. And you know what David doesn't do? And I love this. David doesn't, in the story, look out over the Israelites and over the Philistines, and David doesn't go, there's a strategic advantage that I have here. I can whip this rock pretty fast. David doesn't look at the Philistine Goliath down there in the valley and go, historians and archaeologists years from now will remark that a skilled slingshotter can whip a rock about a pound over 100 miles an hour and be accurate at 400 yards. I've seen some of you golf. You are not even accurate at 300 yards, right? With practice, David, 400 yards, it can inflict severe damage, even breaking armor. It is deadly at 200 yards. David doesn't break out all of that, no. Neither does David do a little math. The force impacted with a 1-pound rock at over 100 miles an hour, let's say within 100 yards, would have a greater stopping power than a Colt 45. David is bringing a gun to a knife fight. No, he doesn't see any of that. That's not where he goes. Where he goes is saying, the God of the angel armies is always on my side. I don't see the enemy. I see God fighting on my behalf. And the only thing I wonder is how this whole thing is going to get done. And you know the rest of the story. The 5 smooth stones, he hurls it at Goliath. Fells him with the first one. I honestly have no idea why he took 4 more. You can look that up online later. That's what Monday through Saturday is for. He's victorious. And come on, you guys know the story so well. I don't even have to read the rest of the story for you. Because I don't think that's the point. The point for us today is, where does David learn to trust God like that? Where does David learn the closeness with God like that? When you're facing your Goliath, when you're facing your giant, whatever the thing is that you think of, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, where does David learn this intimate closeness with God so that's all he sees and he knows he's victorious even before he goes down in the valley? It doesn't happen in the valley. It happens in the shepherd's field. It happens day after day, week after week, year after year of David, like cultivating this relationship with God, this intimacy with God, this closeness with God. I just think it's appropriate for us to end our time together by saying, man, maybe one of the reasons that you don't trust God like David trusts God is that you don't feel nearly as close to God as David felt as close to God. And if you're in day one of the dark room last week, raising your hand like I raised mine and saying, man, there are times, this is the season right now, I feel like I am in the dark room. And God's saying, listen, you're not just waiting, you're waiting, but you're also active, you're also doing something. I'm doing something in you, I'm developing you. And right now, I'm developing this intimate, this trust, this relationship with you. And a relationship with me, God says, is really developed a lot like the other relationships around. So, 3 things. When David is out there in the field, and he's cultivating this relationship with God, first thing that he has on his side, time. A lot of it. He's out there for years and years, hours, all by himself. He's developing closeness. He's developing intimacy with God through unstructured, unplanned time. He's just being in God's presence. If you've got somebody important in your life, maybe it's a mother figure, a coach, a mentor. Maybe you're married to this person, somebody that you want to develop a closeness. Remember, with God, with others, it's the exact same thing. It's spelled time. Unstructured, unplanned time. For a lot of us, what happens in this relationship, how it gets away from us, is because we get busy. You know, there's a time when I was close to God, I was spending all this time with him, 15, 20 minutes in the morning, every morning, and I felt like I could do anything with God. Whatever he asked me to, it's like, absolutely, let's go. There was nothing too big, there was nothing too imposing, but then I got busy. And instead of the personal relationship thing, I guess I decided to just go to church and to like farm that thing out. I love church. I'm not opposed to church, but this corporate gathering is not intended to be the thing that replaces that intimate time spent with God daily. The second thing is David had this radical transparency with God. You open up the Psalms, he wrote a lot of them, and you can just see that he's pouring his heart out. A lot of those Psalms, I think he came up with, he developed, he prayed out, watching over his sheep. He uses all of these shepherding metaphors. And he's just pouring his heart out before God again and again. What we do in like this West Michigan nice, polite thing when we pray, it's like, oh, God, sorry to interrupt, couple things. And we just like, we pray these like scripted kind of nice prayers. And I think what God says, listen, in the time spent with me, if you want to slay a giant out there, man, we got to get close. You got to trust me. This has to be marked by intimacy. You have to tell me what's actually going on. And this might move your prayer life a little bit more from like the PG to the PG-13, maybe even some R-rated prayers, right? That's okay. You're not going to like surprise God with like, oh man, I'm such an angry, jealous, lusting person. God's not going to be like, oh, I didn't know that. That's news to me. Jesus said, go into your closet and close the door so your kids don't hear the words that you have to say to God. No, I'm just kidding. That's terrible. It's not good exegesis. But if you hang on to it, if that goes viral, I went to Western Seminary. Cool. That's good. It's radical transparency before God. This is what's actually going on in my life. And the last thing is the one that's probably vastly the most difficult. You want to develop this closeness with God, this intimacy with God. This is what he's developing in you in the dark room, day one. Surrender. Surrender. Christian couples like to go a lot of the time to Ephesians 5, instructions for Christian households. And the top heading in Ephesians 5, submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. This principle of mutual submission is absolutely world-changing. And I mean that not just from a pastoral lens, but from a historical one. It's this principle that the Christians brought into the world to say, slave or free, Jew or Greek, we're gonna submit and surrender to one another out of reverence to Christ. That is a world defier. That blew people's minds, and it still does today. Man, you go into any relationship, and when you enter this relationship, human-to-human relationship, and you go, I am here to leverage everything that I have and everything that I am for your, not just interest, but for your highest and your best interest, that relationship dynamic changes. When it's a husband and wife, and you're both saying, everything that I have, everything that I am is for your good, your ultimate good, that changes things. And moms, I hope you experience that. When you come into the office setting and there's a manager and the managed, and the manager looks at the managed and says, listen, everything that I have, everything that I am here for your development and for your good. It changes things. Man, that changes the business. That changes the world. If not, it can sure change your world. And our relationship with the divine is the exact same way. Except for we go into it and we're like, I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm going to write you that blank check. I don't know if I'm going to give you the passcode to my phone. I don't know if I'm going to give you everything over. Because I don't know what you're going to ask me. You might ask me to step down into the valley of the law and face down a literal 9-foot-tall giant with a slingshot. I don't know if you're going to ask me to give something up. I don't know if you're going to ask me to sacrifice like I haven't sacrificed before. So I'm going to keep you at arm's length just like this. And I just want to tell you, it's no way to live. That's called religion, just kind of keeping him at arm's length like that. And God wants something more. He wants a relationship out of this. He's going, I know that I'm asking for a lot. In fact, I know that I'm asking for everything. But I tell you what, I'll go first. I'll put your deal over my deal. I'll put your eternity, your salvation. I will put your sin over my comfort. I will step down from heaven into that valley and defeat sin once and for all. I will do that for you. I will show my commitment to you and for your highest interest to you long before you even took a breath, long before you even believed in me, long before you even called yourself a saint. I have done this for you. I'll go first. And now it's your turn to respond, you know. Tomorrow morning, is it going to be a relationship with God time? Trust with God time? You're in that dark room. What do I do? Wasted time. Waiting time, I don't want it to be wasted time. Yeah. Maybe this is the time that God has set apart to say, man, I want you to know me and to trust me like never before. Pick up a Bible, unstructured, unplanned. Just listen from him. Time. Be honest. Say what's really going on. Radical transparency. And then complete surrender. Because after all, he went first. And the result of all of that, not just David defeating a giant that we get hung up on. It's David sitting down in that valley and saying, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. With everything going on, all the noise, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me, and I know you, and I trust you. I invite you to stand up. Let's pray together. Make that our prayer. Jesus, that we would know you and that we would trust you, that we'd have this intimate closeness with you. Lord, that when we looked out and we saw the dangers facing us, we saw the giants taunting us, we looked past them and we we'd see you, the God of the angel armies, always on our side. We would see you, Lord, with all of your power and your might, ready to leverage it all, not just for our interest, but for our highest interest. To develop and to disciple our hearts to be near to you. God, it's what you want. You stood at the door and you've knocked, and you could blow the house down, you could rip the house down stud by stud, but instead you're knocking because you want to be invited in. I pray for the person who's on the fence right now, can't see past the giant taunting, can't hear that you're knocking. But Lord, if you would open up their eyes to open the door and to let you in, to give you our time, to give you our truth, our transparency, to give you our whole selves in surrender. After all, you went first. In your name we pray.